Recording in progress.
Okay, so I'll call this meeting, well, first of all, we're meeting under open meeting laws as amended by acts and legislation, and this meeting is being video recorded. We call this meeting of the Historic District Commission's Organizational Focus Committee to order. And it is Thursday, July 21st, around 3 p.m. And roll call is myself and Bill Oliver. We had invited Andrew, Andy, Pacino here, staff, Holly, and members of the public. Tobias Glidden, Lawrence Sinatra, and can I get a motion to adopt the agenda? Yeah.
So moved.
Okay, I'm an aye too. Minutes, I put together a quick synopsis of events at the last meeting, and as he is putting together minutes, I believe, but none to review or approve tonight, this afternoon. Today, we're going to look at integrating energy resiliency work group, solar modular interest form. Say that 3 times quickly. And that's what I passed out to you. Basically, this is a takeoff from the town's committee and board application form. And consistent with our discussion last week, there would be some, and we'll read through it so you guys know what's going on and members of the public. That we put together an interest form identifying qualifications that could be helped, so we are aware of and know a particular party's what skills, experience, or knowledge they might bring to the work group if they're involved, and also per the town's, what their interests are, and also per the town's form potential conflicts of interests. And from that, I'm just going to kind of read, what I'd like to do is read the first, I'll do them paragraph by paragraph with the bullets. And maybe we can, if we'll just go through that, and if there's questions as we go, pipe in. Is that cool?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So work group interest. Why are you interested in becoming involved with this work group? Seems very simple. Any
Are
objections?
you looking for an answer?
No, I'm wondering, well, you're involved because you're a member of the HDC Organization Focus Committee.
Because I was forced to know.
Yeah. This is going to be the form that we put out for people who are interested in becoming involved with the work group.
Okay.
So that's the first question. And the question to you is, do you have comments about the question?
No.
Andy, do you want to opine anything on?
No, I think that's as straightforward as these comments will be.
No. Interest. So this gets a little more particular. And these aren't necessarily in particular order at this point. If expressing or representing interests or preferences of any other party, please clarify those interests and preferences, and please name the party, list the parties. So that gives anybody an opportunity who is representing the solar industry to say what the solar industry interests are aside from their own personal interests. Or if it's someone who is representing preservation, it gives them an opportunity to outline that and give us a better idea as the Organizational Focus Committee about what interests they're representing. Val, any questions on that one or concerns?
Mm-mm.
Andy, did you want to comment?
This is verbatim from the town.
No, this is the form in terms of the framework is adopted from the town, but the town's is very broad. And the town's is about a specific board or commission or committee, where this is about the work group with more specific intents. So it's not like HDC, it's solar modular. So I want to get specific as to what people's involvement or their involvement, what their interests are. It's not I just want to be clear to, anyone who, the 3 people who might listen to this on YouTube. This isn't a litmus test. That's up to involvement on the conflict of interest basis is going to be up to the state ethics office. This is for the Organizational Focus Committee, and then through the Organizational Focus Committee, the HDC, an opportunity to understand who has a applied to be involved with the work group and what, in this instance, their interests are, or if they represent an interest. You know, it's not unlike when you stand up at town meeting, your attorney, and say, you know, I'm an attorney and I represent so-and-so in this matter. It's just a simple disclosure, but it's two-part because it also gives the person an opportunity to say, well, we represent Tesla and we provide a particular type of a product and our interest is X, Y, and Z. Where maybe a board member from the Nantucket Preservation Trust would say, well, I'm so-and-so and our mission is such and such. And it gives everybody a baseline, because the other thing is these forms will be repurposed after the fact. So, you know, depending on the size of the number of people involved, everyone has an understanding of what everyone else is all about. And I think that that's a fair way to approach it.
What is the cover sheet, just for everyone that's in the room and for anyone watching this, what does the cover sheet look like? What is the flow of review? What's the process look like?
Okay, so we'll get into that after we get through the questions.
Okay.
Good, fine questions, but it'll all be familiar territory.
Great.
Next question in the interest category is, what do you hope to accomplish by being involved? Please be specific. I did put P's, be specific, but
I already redlined that.
nice. That's why you're here. Thanks. Add things you might want to add to this in terms of interest.
Oh, no.
Okay, I mean, Andy, any thoughts on it?
No, I think it's general enough.
Okay. Yeah, some areas I wanted to be general, some areas I wanted to allow or encourage specific answers. So the next one down in the town form is relevant experience. So you can cross off in you and you can capitalize P for provide. And it will be the first bullet. Again, this is the first bullet on the page. It's not necessarily the first bullet on the form. Is provide your understanding of the role of the Nantucket Historic District Commission. Oh, actually, it's going to say in your own words. Provide.
That's what you meant to write, right?
Yeah, I was being quick about this when I did it last night. And I was going to prove it this morning and things went sideways. Because it just seems like another Monday in August. Val, thoughts on that? It was pretty clear that we're just trying to make sure people understand what the HDC's role is. Okay, I think that one's self-explanatory. And you know, what regulatory experience? So the next questions you can, the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to read one of them, but before I'm just going to explain it to you. The first word in each of those sentences is the same, and then the following 1 or 2 words is different. So we'll do one of them, and then you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. What regulatory experience, knowledge, or skills would your involvement bring? We can go back and talk about these. What preservation-oriented experience, knowledge, or skills would your involvement bring? What solar-related experience, knowledge, or skills would your involvement bring? What construction or other technical experience? There's a double there, so I'm going to fix that. Oh, you get the idea. Construction or technical experience. What type of experience would that bring? Knowledge or skills would your involvement bring? The last one is what word processing, desktop publishing, technical and illustrative drawing experience, knowledge, or skills would your involvement bring? So on regulatory experience, any thoughts? Well, on the overall intent of the question, is there any concern, Bill? Okay. Andy? No? Okay, now on regulatory experience, that's a good one.
Yep,
Andy?
Agree.
Preservation oriented experience,
yep,
Good.
solar related experience.
yep.
When we go to nuclear, when we do the nuclear module, we'll have one that says nuclear related experience. Obviously micro reactors. Construction or other technical experience.
Yeah.
Consent. word processing, desktop publishing, technical and illustrative drawing experience. So really what I'm looking for there is if we get somebody who wants to volunteer. I know you love to do this, but I also
I'm
know
not doing
we're
it.
all terribly busy, and there's a difference between bringing together a narrative set of recommendations to bring to the HDC, and then maybe perhaps the process would be upon voting of a recommendation or modifications to recommendations and voting, however that works out, however long it takes. After the fact, putting together some type of a pamphlet. And it may be that through the portion of discussion, we bring in, or we ask to bring in WPI students or volunteers from another organization, or we get a grant for this, because ultimately what we're looking for, consistent with our last discussion, is to break these down into modules so we can chunk them down. We can address perhaps priority type items, solar being one of them up front, because this could be a lengthy process. And we don't want to try and tackle too much at once and burn ourselves out. And again, it is summer on Nantucket. So that was the idea with that one. Thoughts on that, Val?
No, that's good.
Andy?
And this isn't. The overall application will just stay on file, and it's not necessarily to sit in the group, but will be used as a database of people interested, right?
Both, and it will be, so it's going to be to determine whether this is going to serve various purposes. One is going to be to determine who an interested party is, and then to get their feedback on these different questions. With respect to where it goes from there, we will ask, as part of the submitting a form process in a cover sheet, that people complete this and submit it, but on their own, turn it into the State Ethics Commission to determine whether there's a conflict and to what extent their role may be limited. So for instance, as we discussed previously, I envision, given the recent discussion we experienced around the short-term rental work group, there's going to be a large number, in terms of types of people, not necessarily there's a lot of people who are going to be clamoring to get involved. But there's a lot of categories where I presume that the state ethics is going to say, well, you have a conflict, you're not, this isn't appropriate for you to be involved, except as representing your own interests. So you come in, you'd be either informational or advisory, which we welcome. We want to be bringing as many people to the table as we can, but at the same time, we as the organizational focus committee need to be very clear and on who can be involved in what capacity, so we don't run afoul of the laws, because that will undermine the whole process. So that portion of the form will serve the ethics. At the same time, that portion of the form will help to inform other potential members, and it will be on file if anyone wants to look at it, just like any of these other forms are. The relevant experience, the work group interest, and the relevant experience, I presume, are really going to be the most useful, because it's going to give everybody an opportunity who sits or who's at home armchair editorializing to have an opportunity, if they will bother to please click on a link and open the PDFs and see what people's experience or interests are.
Okay.
Does that help?
Great.
Okay.
Perfect.
Potential conflicts of interest. So this is the first one, and so again, adapted from the towns. This one very closely. Please list any committees appointed by the select board, local agencies, or nonprofit organizations of which you are a member, or a member of your immediate family are current members. I think it's self-explanatory. That is more, I think, for the state ethics to look at, but it is an opportunity for us to have an understanding. Are you or any member of your family employed by or receive any financial consideration from the town of Nantucket? Again, from the town form. An adaptation because of the specificity of our endeavor, in particular with the solar module, and being HDC related. The next two are the same with the exception of one phrase. So Are you or any member of your family employed by, or do you or they receive any financial consideration from a preservation entity, oriented entity operating in or operating in any way to affect Nantucket or the town of Nantucket? Then it goes on to say, are you or any member of your family employed by, or do you or they receive any financial consideration from a solar installer company or similar, I'll probably put in or the like, similar oriented entity operating in or operating in any way to affect Nantucket or the town of Nantucket. So questions on those? And do you think there's any other categories for the solar module that we would want? I mean, I put a lot of thought into it, so we would be able to get through it quickly, but I don't want that to appear to be rushing you guys.
I had a couple of questions. if that's
Yeah,
okay.
sure. Do you want to go ahead and start?
Awesome, thank you. One, I wanted to know, which I think this is great to be able to figure out, just like any other committee and commission and all that, trying to get folks, based on what the town has. Will this work group solicit people out in the public?
I'm going to jump into that one when we do the cover sheet, the form, and we can have
Okay.
discussion on that. Is that okay?
And- Fine, and then, about the people that have already asked about, hey, keeping in mind
Yeah,
that
they'll
part
get
of
one of
it.
these forms.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I needed. That's all.
Okay, no, that's cool. Again, just to put it into the meeting
Yep.
flow when we get to it.
Yep.
Val, thoughts? Any additional ones at this time?
Mm-mm.
Okay, Andy, I see you scribbling furiously over there.
What's the timeline to make this public?
Okay, next,
Is that coming out?
the form itself? Yeah.
Okay.
So we're gonna use that just to segue in and reverse. So the form will be put out there, as soon as we can after this meeting, subject to finalizing it with a vote of our organizational focus committee.
I'm leaving next Thursday
Yeah, I figure I'll just put this together like
for a few days.
Thursday. You're gone Thursday?
Yeah, through Sunday.
Okay, I don't think, given the lack of modifications, that we need to review this again. So any motion to approve this will be to approve it to the, print shop, if you will, which is basically me.
Okay,
But that'll take us back to what form the form will have. So the form will take the form of the town's form. It'll indicate it's the, Nantucket Historic District's Organizational Focus Committee, Solar Modular Work Group. We will proceed. It will literally, all aspects of the form will be the same. And we don't have a seal for HDC, correct?
We don't have a seal, we have a header.
Okay, so we probably will put I think we'll just put that on there versus the town emblem.
What? No, we don't have a seal, but we have a header.
Yeah, the other one will go. Okay,
Yeah.
and then you asked who will get it, and then you asked another question. I apologize. I asked you to hold that for just a
Oh,
minute.
yeah, basically, would we solicit in addition to the people that have already asked to be notified?
I
Would we
think-
solicit?
I think we can. The only hesitancy you sense in my voice is I'm just a little concerned about handling the conflict of interest aspect of it, if there's like a ton of people, but it is what it is, so we should just put it out there. I mean, I have no hesitancy about having people involved. I just,
Steve, go ahead.
well, just one second. What I'm trying to consider is what this meeting about is how the HDC, as with the last meeting, will, from an operations standpoint, initiate and manage the work group.
Yep.
Because it's an HDC work group.
right.
So those are what my thoughts are about, not the content.
Right,
And that's when I'm talking, if you sense any hesitancy in my response about people being involved, it's because I'm trying to think through the operational side of it.
right,
And then it went right to the conflict of interest with a large number of people.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
I mean,
It'll just work it out. We'll just have to work it out.
just like how the original one was back in 2008, 2009.
Yeah,
It was
and,
made up of a group of people, of course, don't know how that was done, but
Right.
if this form is gonna be available to the public, then technically that's a form of solicitation. I mean, really, truly, we're asking for people's, who's knowledgeable in these areas that would wanna participate in this.
yeah, and I think the thing that we're gonna want, and Tobias, I'll get right back to you, the thing that we're gonna want to, I'll take comments. The thing that I think we're gonna wanna do is clarify in that solicitation that this isn't a one-time opening. Like it's for the solar module, there will be other modules, number one, and number two, that irrespective of an opportunity to fill out a form to formally become involved in whatever capacity it may end up being, that we will have open public meetings and people are encouraged to come. And, at some point, depending on what happens, we may even have like public hearings. Public meeting being, you guys probably know, but public meeting is the public is invited to attend. A public hearing is the subject matter is open for public input. Under regulatory and statutory controls, some matters have to be a public hearing. And in some instances, we may want to have a public hearing just so it follows an official format. How that will work is just like, the other regulatory boards other than the HDC do it, which is, you open the topic, you open the public hearing, you can have an advisory type person speak, people who are here as a member of the work group for informational purposes speak, and then the public has an opportunity to comment, and then you can either continue the public hearing or you can close it, but in either event after that, the members of the work group get to have conversation on it. So that would be more of a public hearing. Whereas a public meeting would be, you come to, like, this is a public meeting, you can come to the meeting, the chair will, entertain comments. We've invited you to speak initially at the last meeting and now for that specific purpose. So it's not just two HDC members sitting here, or we're looking for an insight on initiating and managing the organizational, operational side of it. That will happen in a similar fashion with people like Tobias is here and Lauren is here, so they have a chance to speak. So anyways, I don't want to beat that too bad, but I think a lesson in civics for people who don't understand the difference, again, the two people who listen to this on YouTube, it might be helpful for them to understand. Tobias?
I just wanted to say, I've participated in many different committees and, it's all the conflict of interest. It's like, as long as we can have public hearings, the public can comment and that's great,
Yeah.
It doesn't, like Val's in architecture, she's on the HDC, she comments, it works. We all have a little conflicts and I think if we work collaboratively, that's great. So whatever the format takes place, it's fine, as long as it's all open.
Okay, yeah.
It's like a team effort. We all want to not be here today. We all want to be out in the sun.
Yeah.
And so let's make sure we can work together to have a smooth process.
I'm with you. Thank you. We appreciate that. It's helpful to hear from you and it's helpful, I think, for people in the public to understand that. So all that having been said, this is number one on our agenda. Any additional thoughts? Val?
No.
Holly?
Sorry.
I was just, my only thought on is based on what the mission of this work group is, right? What our time frame is, because I think that's also gonna be a question of what folks are gonna wanna know.
Sure. So our goal is consistent with the mission and the acts, which is preservation of the character and setting through the promotion of structures that fit that character and setting, energy resiliency. So that's our mission and we'll write it up. I'll write it up. That'll be in the cover. So it's clear. And then the timeline, I think it's going to be a two-part answer. It's going to come down to, and I'd like feedback on this. It's going to come down to how many people want to be interested in what they have to say. We're not going to do, any repetitive stuff. We're a small work group. We don't have time for, 5 people to come in and say the same thing. We'll follow a set of rules like the HDC used to have, where if somebody wants to say the same thing, they can stand up and say, I support so-and-so. We're not, again, trying to close anything down. Either side of a special interest, I'll say special interest, I'm not using that in a kind of a pejorative type of a way. I'm just trying to identify. So like if preservation groups came in, we would ask them to speak, but to try and consolidate their comments. The HDC used to be that one of an interested party would speak for the group. And then anyone else who would like to say aye would say aye, and then you move on. And it's just to prevent the redundancy, because that just kind of, it doesn't help sway anyone. It just drains the air from the room. So we're going to try and follow that type of an approach. So that's going to be part of what the timeline, I think, the number of people involved and how the meetings are managed. I think the collaborative nature of the works is going to determine the time in two ways. One will be the narrative recommendation, and then two would be illustrations and so on for a final formal approval by the HDC. So the HDC might get a list in narrative form describing certain elements that are recommended, or certain approaches, or types of installations. I mean, you name it, it's not limited, other than it's limited by words. The HDC, we might do some quick sketches, informal, then they get an opportunity to review it, outlining the steps, make changes. If it's iterative, then we go back to them, they vote on it. So that will be a component. And the next component will be that part of their vote may be to formalize this into a document, other than a narrative, not unlike these sustainable guidelines that were adopted way back when.
And that's the 2008.
2009.
It was October.
Yeah.
But, they have some illustrations, and I think they did a wonderful job. I wouldn't mind trying to put some more cohesive illustrations in, and with that, I mean, if we're going to add to it, it'll be a similar style or a different style, but they're all similar, so that later on in life, when we redo the guidelines,
Sorry.
we'll have that to work from, the HDC guidelines, not just the solar. And just while I mentioned that, one of the important parts of this is one of the parts of the mission of this work group is integrating energy resiliency while updating. So the format is to update the sustainable guidelines.
Yes.
So I didn't want to leave that out. So if someone sees it in the letter, they're like, wait a minute, you never mentioned that.
2 points.
Yeah, please.
On the addendum that we're discussing now, if we are to rewrite it, I think the concept of modules is of vital importance. So whatever editing is done to that needs to be laid out so that the integration of modules can be consistent. And going back to the initial work group interest form in relation to modules, I think it might be a good opportunity to solicit other modules in that form, potentially, so that we can get some feedback from the parties.
Point taken. I think at this point, my concern is we haven't really even begun to identify the modules other than those that exist. And I would like to, let me think that through. In concept, yes, but I think trying to include it in this form, I think we can, this is how I thought it would happen. It would be more of an organic process. So what would happen is we do the solar module. We proceed through that. As we're proceeding through that, we've identified parties through the interest form and through public hearings, and they become involved. And then we go to do the next module, and that module gets discussion from one of the meetings will be, as we're wrapping up solar, will be, well, let's talk about our next module. Now you're here as part of the solar module, but how do you see that relating to other potential modules? Here are the modules we, as the organizational focus committee and our esteemed guest has, have put together. And we'd like your input on that, and then we'll solicit specific people for interest on those. Because the thing here, Andy, is that I don't know how long this is gonna take, but I don't wanna get people, like, somebody thinks they're gonna become involved for decentralized distributed wind turbines to sign up on, August 5th. And then they don't hear from us again for 6 or 9 months or a year.
Fair enough.
That's the concern, is like more the dynamic of getting people involved and then keeping them engaged. And if your interest is wind, you might have interest in solar, but you're probably not gonna be there attending every meeting. So does that compute with you too?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I simply saw it as an excellent opportunity to fact gather where the town sees the future of energy resiliency existing. And so if we're gonna take 30 of these and keep them on file, a simple line that expresses that feedback would be welcome.
yeah, and I think, thank you, because that helps me to follow through. The other line could be, although this is the solar module, are there other areas of integrating energy resilience you are interested in? And then, and please list them.
Mhm.
And then we'll have a document from these people. They would reapply at a later date, because we might say, are you, or do any of your relatives work for a nuclear power company?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty simple Excel spreadsheet to keep on file.
Yeah, definitely.
And that communication is important, and if we've got people expressing interest early, let's keep them on record, so that we can touch base with them again when the time comes. I agree, it's not gonna be an overnight process, but the more we can get feedback early, I think the group and the town can start thinking about what resiliency looks like, with historic sensitivity in mind. I think it's important.
So I appreciate that. And that actually is a segue to the next one, the next topic. The idea of, and I want to be really careful, because there's, pretty clearly an example on Pleasant Street of where the town's priorities, the town's mission, priorities, goals, and interests either partially or wholly conflict with the HDCs. And this is an HDC work group. So we would be looking to the town for informational and advisory capacity on particular topics that relate to our particular mission. In this instance, solar integration, from the HDC's perspective, not from the town's perspective. That's not to suggest that the town can't run a parallel while they're developing information for their own purposes. But I mean, just to be really clear, as I said at the first meeting, and I said at town meeting, this is, it's an HDC work group. Implicitly, it follows the HDC's mission, and then we're working on it, integrating energy resiliency. So I don't want to put too fine a point on that, but I think it's an important baseline for future involvement with the town. I don't want to give particular examples, because I'm not looking to, poke a bear or stir up a nest. That's not the goal. It's just to identify the fact, I think, into being intellectually honest, that there are, there's conflicting priorities. And on one hand, and on the other, the HDC needs to maintain control over the management and operation of the work group, and what information it receives and is included under the umbrella of the work group. So for instance, just to give a little more detail on that, if the town collects information and furthering its goals for energy resiliency, that's great, but we're not going to necessarily, unless it dovetails with the HDC's mission, incorporate it under our umbrella. We're not going to present this body of information when there's a conflict in the priorities, because it would send a mixed message. And I think, as a regulatory agency, it would be counterproductive to what our goals are. I can't give you specifics, I don't know, but I can envision scenarios where, I'm just going to use a crazy one where, pole mounted energy stations that are pink, that are multifaceted and glittery on a 30-foot tall pole may be part of a recommendation that the town receives. That and the related information aren't going to be in the information that gets circulated with the work group or from the work group, because it's clearly a conflict in what our mission is. This may be the latest and greatest technology. It helps to cut down on the extension cord probability. It solves all kinds of problems, and it blends, frozen drinks for you. All that's great, but it's not part of what the HDC's mission is. So, okay, I just want to be real clear up front, because that's, I think, a really important part of what we're doing.
I think that's clear. I would just want to throw out one thing, because I think as town staff, I would be
Yeah.
remiss in the fact that it's very clear that select board, through their strategic plan, utilizes resiliency preservation as part of their overall focus. Granted, we understand that there's multiple different things in there, affordable housing, all these, so, but I get what you're saying, that this is an HDC focus, not necessarily a town. I would think we would want to have an alignment.
Yeah, and I think
with
there's,
what we would want to work
I
on.
agree, Holly, and I thank you for saying that. I think, I just want to be on the record with all this stuff up
Yep.
front, because I think it's important, and I want your feedback, and I want your feedback, and if you guys want to comment, I'll entertain those for sure. But the alignment, I think there are plenty of areas where we can align and plenty of areas where we can collaborate. I think it's important to note that this isn't a territorial thing. This is a regulatory mission thing. Like, the select board has a very broad encompassing agenda with respect to the public, and that's energy resiliency that accomplishes the most for the most at the cheapest. That's not the HDC's mandate. Now, the HDC's mandate is not shut down what the select board's mandate is.
Right.
But at the same time, it is to promote the preservation and the character and setting consistent with, or the character and setting for consistent with the existing and the historic character and setting. So that's what I'm trying to say in many words, but I think they're all important. Yeah. There's a ton of space to be collaborative.
Mhm.
And it's kind of a two-way street too. So like, a good example of a collaborative area would be the lighting on the historic streets. That I understand there's a study going on. So that would, I know I'm not,
This is so weird. Can I speak, please?
well, first of all, Lauren, you didn't ask to speak, so I
I'm
didn't,
not, well, I'm asking.
well, yeah,
I didn't know where the public comment was for section number 1, so we waited.
okay,
Before we
well,
get to section
okay,
two.
for the record, because I don't want this to go anywhere it shouldn't, Tobias asked to speak, and he had an opportunity to. You did not ask to speak,
Well, maybe I'm in a bad spot.
and you know, to characterize this as weird is kind of problematic for me, because it seems like you're adversarial out of the gate.
No, I'm not.
Okay, I just want to be clear. What did you want to comment on?
Steve, just for the record, she was just waving and you didn't see her, that's all.
Oh, I don't have eyes in the back of my head, I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not a magician,
We're all in it together.
so.
Yeah. So for the record, I do appreciate the work group and all the work that Stephen, you've personally done. I really am interested in this topic, obviously, and I'm here to offer my support in any capacity, because I don't, the silos in the town and the regulatory agencies do concern me. I feel like we should achieve alignment as soon as possible and work in tandem however we can. I don't think that there would be a natural disconnect. I think anything that the town tries to do with its energy resiliency, renewable energy, we respect the HDC and are not carrying forth in conflict. We understand the balance that needs to be achieved. Those are the projects that tend to be or are most successful, the ones that do get developed. There's that respect for the community and the island and what it represents. So I am here to offer my insights. I don't represent an industry, private interest, but I do bring a lot of institutional knowledge that I hope can be utilized by this work group so that we can work in tandem in alignment from the beginning, and to offer my technical assistance, even if it is reviewing the forms. I feel I can bring a voice to the table that could be collaborative and constructive. not to be sitting behind you, and maybe there's a seat for me at the table earlier on.
Sure, so I'll respond to that. One, I certainly appreciate your comments, Lauren. You know, we've worked together on projects that have had great significance to the town. The outcomes have not necessarily been the way that the HDC thought they were gonna work out. So that's a cautionary tale for us going forward, but as a whole, there are benefits to that. Working together, obviously, your insights, your institutional knowledge. I do have some concerns about a broad scope consideration that there's direct alignment and everything. There are wind turbines, not going to get into details of that, but on the South Shore, there is a clear and distinct difference between the HDC's mission and philosophy and what they would prefer to have an outcome for a variety of those projects, and the select boards. So, and the town energy office. So you may not represent a particular industry, but you do represent the town, and the town is not necessarily, you know, if we were marching in lockstep on this with respect to alignment and preservation and the historic character and setting, I think a lot of the issues where there are contentious matters going around the town would not be happening. So clearly, you know, let's just, you know, acknowledge the elephant in the room. That's one part, that's alignment. With respect to a seat at the table, everyone is going to have an opportunity to fill out a form. We'll determine whether there's a conflict of interest through the state, and then we'll make an assessment of who gets involved in what way. Because that's the most important part for me, being process oriented, that we haven't impeached our efforts out of the gate. That's not acceptable.
If I could add one thing,
Yeah.
it's very important for me in my role with the town to educate the community and keep them kind of abreast of these projects and policies also. So that is another reason why I'm just asking to be looped in better, so I'm more aware of how to communicate accurate information to the public who are very much interested in these topics.
Sure. And on that topic, I think, you know, it's evident that these are public meetings. They will be recorded. People can watch them. People can, you know, you can watch them. You can be here. The HDC, you know, may have a different perspective on what was said and why. In fact, I'm certain at some point, perhaps once in the whole process, there will be a difference of opinion on what happened and why. So we wouldn't be looking, and just want to be clear up front, the HDC Organizational Focus Committee would not be looking for a representative of the town to be representing to the community what we're doing. That's an HDC function. You're obviously welcome and encouraged to share your opinion, but it's not going to be as a spokesperson for
I
the
don't
work
think
group.
that, if I may, I don't think that's what she's mentioning, just that people come to her from an overall energy perspective. And I don't want to speak for two other energy people in the room, but you know, she is the point of contact for that, not necessarily obviously the HDC.
Oh, I mistook it. I thought, Lauren, you were
Yeah,
saying that you would be, you know, getting information out. I thought you said you would get information out to people. And I mistook it to be like, you know, an email or a bulletin that you send out with an update. And you're welcome to do that, but it's not an HDC work group update. It's that if we, you know, if we issue a work, if the HDC issues an update, it will be through the HDC. That's just how, you know, it'd be like going to, you know, I understand with your relationship with the select board, it's different. You are actually representing the town energy policy. So naturally, as a flow from that, you extend and you know, publish materials and you talk about topics representing the select board. The HDC does that for themselves. And
Well, if we're just talking about solar specifically, I do answer questions about solar and the HDC guidelines all the time. And that's what I thought the context here was. So just the fact that it's kind of ballooned into integrating energy resiliency is a little confusing for me. I thought the mission really had to do with updating the sustainability guidelines, which is what we point people to follow.
right, so the integrating energy resiliency is about how the HDC is looking at Nantucket in 2050 or 2060 as a result of the changes to the sustainable guidelines. so that there is a long-term view on how we as a community are going to go about integrating energy resiliency. It is not about, in particular, solar. Solar is just one of the modules. So-
And arguably the most impactful of any opportunity on the
Yeah.
table, besides small scale nuclear, which is.
Yes,
We're not there yet.
Yeah,
But to Lauren's point, this is the only opportunity for the next 40 years for town to have a voice. So whether that, whoever is representing that, or if it's only in public comment that town's input can be received by this group, I think that's a cautionary moment where we need to make sure that those things are acknowledged now, because if they're not, they won't be.
yeah, and I don't know, I mean, you said it succinctly, which I appreciate, but that's, what we're saying. The town is a distinctly different entity than the historic. I mean, the Historic District Commission is established by an act from the 50s. It has its own mandate, just like the NPDC does. Now, in the 50s as amended. But yeah, the HDC, the Organizational Focus Committee is working amongst itself, developing a work group consistent with the HDC's mission to integrate energy resiliency techniques in a way that is appropriate to the mission. And we're inviting as many people as are interested from as many different walks of life, cross-sectional representation to get involved. Part of that involvement will be determined by the conflict of interest. A large part of that will be determined. And likely the outcome will be is that there will be folks who come in who are serving in public meetings to speak or at public hearings to provide informational or advisory as they've been asked by the work group. The idea that solar, I mean, let's back up a second. Solar was the impetus, but the Organizational Focus Committee isn't limited to solar, or we would just save ourselves a lot of hassle. We're looking at a bigger picture because that's our role. We're hopeful that that aligns with town determinations and town goals, but there's nothing, just look at history. The town and the HDC have differences of opinion. Part of that is due to the very nature of their existence. For instance, the select board, their role is not to do what the HDC does. Ours is a preservation, historic character and setting alignment.
They'll tell you.
Yeah, so we have a different nature in where we come out on certain topics. And I wanted to be clear about that. I will, probably have to say it 1,000 more times. I will try to come up with a way to say it more succinctly, but I try to provide people information and flavor for context. And it does not in any way, shape, or form preclude the involvement of Lauren as the representative of the town's goals and policies. But there are natural kind of guardrails on that involvement. And the other thing I'll say is, part of the reason you're sitting behind me is because I came in and this is where I sat. This room is of that nature. If we reoriented chairs over there, we could sit so people were here and you guys could be seen. It's not we didn't have an opportunity to decide we were gonna, first of all, I didn't know anyone was gonna be here, or I would have probably been thoughtful enough to move some chairs, which is my nature. So I just want to be clear that there's no oh yeah, well, when Clinton was in office, President Clinton, and we were negotiating with North Korea, the negotiation team would go in and they would sit on wooden chairs. And every day they went in, they would have cut 1/4 of an inch off the bottom of the chair. To the point that when the Clinton negotiation team was going in, they were sitting, basically the chair was this low. I don't have that kind of capacity to think in advance. I just, I didn't know who was going to be here. I thought it was going to be, 3 or 4 of us, and that's what I went from. All right.
Luckily, Lauren and I are both very tall and we find short.
Yes. Good. Bell number, forget to bring the saw next time. Data assessments provided by outside parties. So this is a great example. This is what I'd actually hope to speak about. Holly had come to me a little while back and mentioned the Worcester Polytechnic Institute students on an initiative through the town's energy department was going to be, and correct me if I got this wrong, was going to be looking for a new syllabus for involvement on energy-related matters on Nantucket. That's a great example of where the town has differing, not necessarily diametrically opposed, and the HDC has differing, but not necessarily diametrically opposed interests. So what we would be looking for, and the purpose of this being on the agenda, was to one, broach the topic, for us to think about what type of data would we want to ask if someone was volunteering the services of those students in gathering information. What would be useful for the HDC in its work? What would be useful for the organizational focus committee? What would be useful for the work group? Not what would be useful for the town, just as we don't expect that we would come up with a list and tell the town that these are the things that should be studied. We don't anticipate the town is going to then say, well, these are the things that are going to be studied.
I'll tell you, if just,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll tell you right now, from my previous involvement with WPI and working with Lauren, for me, as a planner and a preservationist, I never thought of it being separate. So that might be very difficult for me, but I will help. And basically, yes, we have been speaking with Dominic, with WPI, he's the director of overall the school, about how could WPI students help us, meaning not just the HDC, not just the town, but us as a collective whole, a collective community
Yeah.
on all these different topics, and how their services for a semester would help us, whether it's for this, for, having, and from an economic perspective, I know that comes up to the HDC quite a bit, which really should be under their purview, and you guys say that quite a bit. You guys are looking at it as aesthetics. So I think Lauren and I were wanting to come across to this as, please step in, Lauren, on that, as a collective whole, not as individualized, while understanding that there's these modules that would want to work together. So anyway, that's my take.
Great. No, I appreciate that. And Lauren, you can hop in if you want on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we approached it as working together to see what that balance, that sweet point is for the community to both embrace solar in a historically appropriate way. I think we were thinking of it as a collaborative experiment that would support this work group with educational resources, public surveys, updating our solar maps so we could show the public that, yes, there's more solar than most people imagine. So we only saw it as a benefit, and I think Dominic agreed it could be a very interesting and timely topic to research. So I hope there is a role for them. But again, there has to be alignment here.
Well, there doesn't have to be, but it would be helpful if there was, because there's going to be things that there simply is not alignment on. Like, for instance, if I'm just going to use a crazy example because examples help us to illustrate life. If the students come back and say every single roof on Nantucket should have solar on every single inch of roof, obviously I'm using hyperbole, there's not alignment there, because that's not consistent with embracing solar in a sensitive historic manner.
Right.
Now, the other thing I want to bring up is the role of the solar module is not, first of all, there's no historically sensitive manner to embrace solar. Solar was not an historical element in the environment. It's that simple. The idea is, how do we integrate it? We've talked about some examples of new and existing structures, both inside the historically sensitive areas and outside. Those will be different solutions. But that is to a large extent, the point. How do we integrate it? Not how do we incorporate solar in a sensitive way? Because those are two very different goals. One disregards the historic character and setting and because what is sensitive, who defines that? It's like a lawyer saying, you know, adding reasonable to a contract. Well, you'll do this in a reasonable manner. I mean, that's just fraught with problems. Again, I'm not suggesting this is a baseline. I'm just saying as an example of where things could go awry. But after you speak, I'll tie that back into what I'm talking about specifically, because your perception of what I'm saying about the WPI stuff may be different than what I'm thinking, and it may not be articulated, but go ahead.
So WPI students, that's part of their whole work. They're just like how they did with their last work group that they had that I helped with the whole demo construction and aspect. They interviewed commissioners, they interviewed people on the deconstruction aspect, they interviewed a whole bunch of people to get all these facts and information to come up with recommendations, but understanding those recommendations needed to have an alignment with a lot of different aspects. So yes, there are going to be some polar opposite, I think, aspects of it, but it's not going to say this is what needs to be done. Second of all, I want to just caution or just remind everybody, I know you know this, is, you know, there are overall guiding principles and standards, the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation specifically for solar. So we're not quote unquote reinventing the wheel. We're looking how we can expand it, because I will want to remind everybody, like I always do, that Nantucket was used as a case study for all historic districts in the nation for solar. And, you know, so I think that's very important to really understand that we're not starting from scratch, that the guidance is there and it has been evolving. Yes, has it been evolving to the way that the industry wants to see it? Don't necessarily know that, but, and then focus it back into how Nantucket, I think, has been incorporating. So I guess there's 2 points there, that WPI, they're students, but they're also looking at multiple different lenses. And I do think based on the information that they did the last couple of years that I've been working with some of those students, they bring it back. And you can bring it back to a level where how can this town of Nantucket, or how can whoever that organization is, utilize this information and not have conflicting information? So I hope that's helpful.
No, that's helpful. And I think just a couple of quick ones on that. I think on just the idea of recommendations and that kind of ties into interviews, which is another way of surveying. I don't think, you know, I don't know the last time the HDC made a determination based on a survey. It's not the nature of that regulatory board, unlike the planning board, which makes zoning bylaws and changes based upon public input and for a particular reason. The mission is different. The character and setting, preservation and protection and promotion of this character, historic character and setting, is a black and white. There's a lot of gray there, but it's a black and white mission, where promotion of the health and general welfare of the community of the island, which is what zoning addresses, is wide open. And that's where public input and surveys is very important. So my concern opening a door is twofold, to be frank. Recommendations that are based on interviews that could unintentionally, as it were, be used to direct the outcomes of the HDC's work group's recommendation in a way that is pressures, I think, in any way, the mission of the HDC. Like, it's just bad business in my mind to be condoning something that basically can hit you over the head and make it harder for you to do your job. And I'm not suggesting that would happen, but you know, you look at what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages. I think from the work group standpoint, sharing with you, the idea is we would be looking for information. We would be looking for information. I'll use a couple of examples, but there will probably be many more, and you guys could help us, please think of them. That would be alignment, that would be collaborative. And that's what I mean by separation. Like, we would put in for, these are items that we would prefer, please, to have included.
Yeah.
But we're not saying you have to do a separate report for us.
Right.
And we're just saying, but we're also saying, please don't represent that this is an HDC energy resiliency report, because it's not.
did you get to see their last report that
Yeah.
worked on deconstruction?
Yeah.
It was a CDC, it was coming from Graham as our energy, as our recycling coordinator,
Right.
so, but incorporated the fact that you guys approve, demolition, and then also incorporate preservation from NPT, so there's a lot of different interests
Yeah.
into it, and that's what WPI does. And I just, that's where Lauren and I were like, well, we could align, we could utilize them, the town, has the students, we're very fortunate, I think it's 6 or 7 years now, to help form, just help us and be another, avenue for that. Yeah.
And I think, I'm sorry, want to go?
Yeah, and if I could just add, the context was always the 2009 sustainability guidelines and recommending maybe ways to update it, because that's what I thought this work really was going to focus on. And a good example you raised, as I maybe raised in the past, were updating the photos with real life, HDC approved pictures. Those photos are, the schematics are just so inaccurate. No one will install an array that actually looks like those, with one panel here, one panel. So, or how to link up our permitting better. So you're not only capturing the number of panels or the color in the HDC permit, but linking it to the capacity or the inverter or the battery size. We're not capturing the key resiliency metrics
These are,
in any of the permitting. So, and there's more and more
There's more,
examples,
yeah.
but I think we have to get to the heart of the perception versus reality with solar on Nantucket. And I think they can help us educate the community. And I think they could help this work group too. I think that is a real problem that should be addressed. Just because a lot of people can't see solar doesn't mean that it isn't already
Correct.
installed. Not to say that more can be done, but I think the HDC has a lot to be proud of, and they can help us to showcase that.
yeah, thank you for that. And I don't disagree with any of that. I know we're gotta roll pretty soon. I appreciate you both sticking this out, because this is an important element of what we're doing, and it's all, topical and at the moment. Yeah, I don't disagree with any of those comments. I think that there's two aspects. I think there's still a fine line between this being an HDC document and then the HDC pulling from that information. And well, I don't think there's a fine line. I think there needs to be a line. I think that secondly, the idea of, Lauren gave a specific example with photographs. That's a great idea. But that, just to be clear, that might be something that they're tasked to provide. But for us, it would come much later in our process.
Right.
But having them here as a resource to do that is wonderful. The other thing is, Lauren, you hit on a bunch of metrics that I think are terribly important for us as a community to have, some of which are important for the HDC to have: colors, locations, cardinal points relative to orientation of the house. I would like to know, we get told all the time, it has to be here. Well, what if you put this on, what if you use a different type of panel, or you use fewer panels, or you use more panels, and you put them on a rotating axis that's seasonally adjusted, so that you might be able to put this in a historically sensitive area out of view, and you're optimizing it. So there's a ton of information that we cannot compile, and it would be beneficial for a disinterested third party to do. I'm not in any way arguing about that. I'm bludgeoning this on the HDC involvement side of it, because it's an important distinction to make up front and then to carry forward. So for instance, a survey is not really, depending on a survey, unless the HDC sponsors it and puts it in place with the verbiage, I would strongly recommend getting involved in a survey. I would strongly recommend getting involved in a survey, because we don't have control over the verbiage. And I think that, you can, not to suggest that there's any malintent, but the outcomes have huge different potential meanings, and all of that comes to rest on our shoulders and the work group shoulders in putting together a recommendation. And I'm trying in part is to avoid the political aspects of this. I don't want to get into politics of community use. I don't want to get into politics of climate change. I don't want to get politics of for or against anyone. I'm not taking a side. That's not what this is about. This is about integrating energy resiliency, in particular solar. Solar was the impetus at town meeting. The organizational focus the Organizational Focus Committee has decided to broaden that mandate, which is our charge and our, at our own will. Tobias, do you have a comment?
I just wanted to, maybe clarify, reiterate some of the things you said, Stephen, which is that, town meeting, one, it did mention solar.
Yep.
But it also mentioned energy systems, so I think it's appropriate for the committee to review those. Second of all, I think we're here is because the town meeting voted for this to go to a committee to discuss it and come up with some good recommendations. And I think it's very important for the HDC to be involved in that, but I think it's important for the community with multiple needs regarding energy, regarding resiliency, for those to come together, for everybody to work together in a collective, healthy way to come up with guidance that's helpful for the community. For example, there are building code guidelines for solar that are not necessarily incorporated in HDC designs, but that is part of the building code. That is a piece we could look at. Secondarily, there's a lot of conversation about roof color. That could be something that's integrated as part of the process to make it just easier for people. Like, I just want, at the end of the day, everybody in the community to not be in this room, but be out at the beach, because the process was just easy. And as a person who's recently restored an 1880s carriage house and ripped the lath myself and burned the lime plaster and horsehair to have a historically significant building that has solar on it, I think that's a very important story to tell. I'm not coming at this as a solar person. I'm coming at this because I love this community and I want it to work, us all to work together. So I hope that's just my feeling. I probably won't be at a lot of these meetings. Tim will be here, but just my general vibe is that we should be working together, and that's what the community wants, is us all to work together.
And I think that's what we want too, because there's nothing worse than when you guys come in, broad statement, you guys, community people, and like, it has to go here or forget it. And then we
Yeah.
get forced to like deny something because we're basing it on our guidelines. And then they go to the select board. It's just a useless process. So this is
Yeah.
good. This is great.
Exactly, yeah.
And, we've all gotten, I think, some good ideas going. And that's collaboration. I love it.
Yeah. And just to give very brief, the last meeting, we were actually, for the purposes of kind of fleshing out what the organizational structure would look like or needed to look like, how it would operate, how it would be managed by the HDC, we started getting into just brainstorming. And some of that brainstorming was about, those things that we prefer to see as best practices in the HDC, which are having clear guidelines so that commissioners can be consistent, so that applicants can understand what they're getting involved in advance, to the extent that we were throwing around the idea, and I think it's very viable, that there are many instances where solar could be, an installation could be a consentable item. What are the conditions and how do we make that happen? That's, we want to make this work for the community too. It just needs to work within, first we've got to get there within the guardrails of the HDC's mission. And second of all, it needs to support and promote that mission. That's not to suggest that it's going to be more restrictive than it is now. If anything, I would think that it's going to be more liberal, subject to categories of areas where these things can occur, subject to techniques in new construction, like relocating the stack fence, so you don't have this huge panel missing in a roof that creates all kinds of discussion in HDC that lasts
That
for
was a
like
good idea.
an hour, and all of a sudden we're just like, we all want to put a gun to our head because we're talking about something that we could review, form a recommendation on, vote a guideline, and then we don't have to talk about it anymore. We can make it consentable or not. So these are things we're looking for too. Lauren, you had a ton of good ideas on information to gather. We want to see that on the economics. I just want to say the last thing, this idea that we sit at the table and we hear, well, they need this to be economically viable. I will say right up front, clearly, and I will say it again and again, to my mind, unless the WPI students come up with, based on an industry standard, and for our particular region, the Northeast, and particularly for our latitude and longitude and our kilowatt hour cost, what is a viable installation based on a number of bedrooms, then I think that their information is going to be lacking. Because the HDC needs to have an objective third-party source, and it might even be part of it might even on a contentious application become part of a pre-study, some type of a pre-study thing where if someone comes in and they want to battle over it, and it's this extensive installation, you, at some level in the regulatory process, you've got to prove your point. Because, you know, if you're looking at the waste product, if you're looking at the visual impact, and it's in an area that could be considered historically sensitive, and the argument is going to be, well, they need more, we need to have an understanding of that. It's not our purview to make a decision based on that, but I think it is helpful. And it may be that some of these things we broaden what our mission is. We necessarily look at the act in a way, and I think this is the very tail end because this gets into our guidelines, but there may be points of each of these modules that we say, the act, we need to modify a little bit here and a little bit here so that the HDC has the authority to ask for this information, which is really to the benefit of the community, but could also be to the benefit of applicants. But we're not going to, we can't piecemeal that legislation. We've got to do that at the end of the modules. We'll have a list of things. And I'm saying we, being the HDC, we will accept input at some point in the process for arguments to the contrary. I'm always open to being, persuade me.
Well, I think, Stephen, if I could add in, like, ultimately, it's like when asphalt shingles first started getting involved, people were probably advocating like, hey, I want to put asphalt shingles on because it's cheaper than a wood roof, right? And then the HDC at one point was like, oh, we don't like this, and then they evolved, you know, there was the green ones, remember the green ones forever, you know?
All green.
Yep.
Seafoam green, which hopefully will make a comeback, but, you know, but at over time, the HDC was like, okay, here are the ones we like, and these are acceptable, and, you know, go, and then it's easy for folks, and the thing I think that's really fabulous about that, because, you know, I put asphalt shingles on my house, and you know what was great is I didn't have to do a complicated process. It's
Right.
approved on consent.
That was
You
one of
know?
our work group
Yeah,
results,
and
and
that-
fences,
Yeah,
mini
totally.
splits.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, that was the whole idea of initiating was best practices so that we could distill these kind of routine decisions down from a half an hour discussion over proclivities to what is the voted guideline. And we've been able to say, I don't even know what we would be so underwater right now if we hadn't adopted even those few sets of guidelines with the amount of work we have, because we started that, we adopted those in 2018, and then construction really went, you know, crazy. And if we were trying to deal with fences, and we'll spend 15 minutes, a half an hour just talking about a fence, about the same topic we discussed the day before. And sometimes some of us will have a diametrically opposed opinion, even though our words are in the minutes. So like, this is a good thing, I think, for everyone to be able to have guidelines to refer back to have guidelines to refer other people back to. I think this is a good thing. I wanna jump back. We're way over. I do wanna add to relevant experience, the question, have you watched, have you studied the work
Have you
group
attended?
meetings to date? Because I think it's important for people to have a clear understanding. This is really foundational information, and I think it's important for them to understand, how does the town energy department fit into this? What would they like their role to be? What would Tobias, as a concerned citizen, but as owner of a solar company, what would he like it to be? Like Holly's perspective on these topics so far, Val's and mine, Andy's, I think it's gonna be important. So I'd like to add those, I'll add that. Then, you know, people can say they did, but
And
yeah.
that you guys actually have approved quite a bit of solar over the last couple of years.
Well, that's what I think with the WPI study is,
Can help with
it
that.
can really help
But
get
it's
people
true.
to understand that there's a tremendous amount of, it's not like short-term rentals, tremendous amount, but there's ways.
There's way more pools than there are solar panels.
Yes, but that's true.
There's
I would
about-
agree with that.
There's about 1,000
And
pools.
the rule on that is can't be seen at time of inspection and thereafter in perpetuity.
But there's a topic for integrating energy resiliency as pools.
So on the vineyard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a module.
Yeah, there's and that's like something that's gonna be more energy department than HDC, because it's not nearly visible, but like, I think we can help each other.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing. One comment though,
Yeah.
the word resiliency is throwing me in this context versus sustainability, which is a little more broad
Right.
and understood, because, you know, resiliency, you need some kind of a backup source. So whether it's batteries or, you know, a smart system, or I'm just thinking if you focus on solar, and module is confusing because it's also a component.
Yeah, I was
keep
confused.
getting thrown by
at the
that,
beginning.
so-
Right, well,
Um,
it's a component of our overall effort.
Right, so solar hot water should also be part of this initial solar work group.
Yes,
Should it not?
yeah, and that's why I didn't say
And it doesn't-
solar
PV.
photovoltaic, I just.
That's
left
why I
it
thought it
solar.
was modules. 'Cause,
No, I'm not talking about solar.
No, that's how we divide up our
Yeah, we break our-
categories.
our work
I got it,
Yeah.
it's just that the pun that could get confusing.
Yeah,
Um,
people are just gonna have to adapt.
but I think sustainability might be more impactful.
I'm adverse, and I don't mean
And
nothing
resiliency,
personal.
which is specific in terms of reliability and redundancy, and it's not always going to transfer to your modules, I think as cleanly as you want.
But sustainability doesn't necessarily either, because these, let's use solar, for instance, they're not individually sustainable. So for me, you're using, and I understand your point of view, you're using the common industry
Energy
meetings
sustainability.
you're using the terms, the meanings for those terms in your industry. Where we're using them from more like a layman's standpoint. So for me, like, sustainability is a very broad thing that covers. Well, first of all, I didn't bring it up on the floor of town meeting. I brought up energy resiliency. Resiliency is, to me, without having to define the word, is more to capture the content and spirit of Nantucketers and what we've done in the past, and bringing that forward. Where we are resilient, this is energy resilience. We are developing, as opposed to another core to the mainland, we are developing a resilience in energy resilience for our own little island, and meaningfully integrating it.
Let's define it.
Yeah, that's not gonna be in the cover letter, but yes,
It needs to be defined.
yes. Okay, so that's an action point. Have you watched meetings is an action point. Community is an action point. The cover letter and the form are an action point. Prices law is that 50% of the work is done by the square root of the number of people involved. So I just want you to know that I expect that we get a larger group, because I am not going to be the main part of that square root.
But we always do all the work.
Well, that's why we're the organizational focus committee. That's why we're
I think there should be the entropy reduction.
entropy.
That's what
love
I'm looking, that's the word you're looking for, Steve. Little Gregory Basin.
I'll say that there's probably a role for Nantucket's army of HERS raiders to weigh in on resiliency and sustainability as it relates to individual homes and how solar PV or hot water can play out for a net zero opportunity for each individual building, being that every new home has to have a HERS rating already. And those ratings quickly evidence whether or not a home can be net zero and effectively resilient or sustainable interchangeably for that neighborhood or that individual. So I'm going to say that we've already got that in the code,
The solar
in code
requirement.
under stretch code.
is code.
Yeah, and for me, sustainable is about something, and resilience is against something. It's it's a resilience in the face of something, and we are
Getting a brain
energy.
tumor.
I think.
Yeah, and this is like kind of esoteric discussion anyways. Okay, so yes, I'm glad you came. Next time, we're gonna put you front and center so we can see you. I apologize, that was not my intention. Tobias, I know you'll always speak up. I'm not worried about it, and you're welcome to. That's not a backhanded anything.
And can I make one more point?
Yeah.
And it's time to go, I suspect, but I appreciate your clarity of mission. I think it's spot on. I do anticipate that we're gonna get plenty of political weigh-in and social interaction. And I think it's vital to this group to actually welcome all that input and take the opportunity, because again, this will be the last opportunity likely for at least 10 years, and if not for 40, to have a very reasonable, exciting, excitable, but vital discussion to, when I say town, I mean Nantucket's citizens, not just the town and its interests, but every person on this island needs to have an opportunity to make their case and make their own recommendations as to what they need.
Well said, point well taken. And my comment, just for clarity on politics, is that we won't be weighing into the politics. People are welcome to come and espouse their views, as long as they're not redundant. And they'll be listened to and taken into consideration. But our role, that's the purpose of the mission, is to clarify that up front, so that we stay, we've got a North Star that we stay on, and we don't have to get caught up in the politics of it. Someone, if it gets political through some other entity, you'd simply refer them back to the mission and saying, this is consistent with the HDC's mission. It's consistent with what was voted on the floor of town meeting, and it's where we're going. You want to make it about something else, knock yourself out, but we're not going to get involved in it. It's not our role.
And that the HDC Special Acts mission is actually different than any other historic district in the Commonwealth of
Yes.
Massachusetts. So that's very important.
Yeah.
Not
Because-
many people realize that.
Yeah, and solar is directly promoted in the chapter 40
Yes.
version, and the HDC, but they're not dealing with
They're not.
the National Historic Landmark, which is an entire island.
There's a reason
Well, it's
why
actually
we
3
have
islands.
our special act. So
Yeah.
leave it at that.
So I think we got a good group, and I think we can do a lot. I'm the kind of person who likes to set up the boundaries, and then we can go to town. Philosophically speaking, figuratively speaking. With that, I don't think we'll meet next week. I would entertain a motion to draft the form, short cover letter, and I'll take acts as necessary to make that happen through staff.
I make that motion.
And I wholeheartedly second the motion. And I thank you guys again for coming and your.
Motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
So moved. And on your motion,
Aye.
and I'm an aye.
Thanks for all your effort on this, Stephen.
Yeah, sure.